Okay. So the portion this morning is this week is Lecha. Begins on page 69 in Eitz Chaim, chapter 12 of Genesis. And so in many ways, one could argue that the Torah should begin here. If the Torah is going to start with a story of the Jewish people, then the Jewish people really begins with Abraham and Sarah in this week's portion. If you want to argue that we need to include also some background as how we got here, well, that's the first 11 chapters. So, the rabbis have debated over the centuries, if the purpose of the Torah is to teach us law, then we don't need Genesis. We just need Exodus and the rest of the Torah. But clearly, Torah is more than just law. It's history, but history from a religious perspective. So it's not history in the academic sense of history, going through the sources and providing the details of exactly what happened when. That's not what the history that the Torah provides us. It's not that kind of history. It is a religious perspective on events that, by the description, could actually be historical or historically accurate, but we don't look to the Torah to provide history. Okay, so that is, even though traditional Jews would say that everything in the Torah is true because God said it, or gave it to Moses, or dictated it to Moses, still, from a non-Orthodox perspective, the Torah is clearly not an accurate portrayal of events. But it would be more fitting to say that it is a religious perspective on events. So, we could comment about the election last night we could comment from a political perspective. We could comment from a sociological perspective. We could comment from a historical perspective. We can comment on it on a religious perspective. There are different perspectives on the election yesterday in America. All perspectives would be appropriate, and it depends what we want to learn from it as to the kind of perspective we are looking at it. So if we look at the election from a religious perspective, there are articles that I've seen in which Trump was portrayed as this king of Israel that nobody really remembers, King Yehu, whose task was to kill Queen Jezebel. So from the evangelical Christian right perspective, Donald Trump was King Yehu, and Kamala Harris was Jezebel in that Christian, far-right Christian perspective. Okay? So we can look at events in a whole variety of ways, depending on how we want to see it. So Torah provides us with a Jewish perspective, a Jewish religious perspective on the world around us and on events in the world around us, okay? The Torah is not meant to accurately portray exactly what happened when, okay? We don't look to the Torah to find out what happened when, okay? So I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so chapter 12 page 69 in the Eitz Chaim, whatever edition of Chumash you have, chapter 12 of Genesis. So like I said, we now start with the story of the Jewish people, and let me clarify that comment. Technically speaking, it's not the Jewish people yet, okay? There is a difference between the Israelite people and the Jewish people. So it's easier to say Jewish, to go all the way back. But technically speaking, it's not Jewish yet until we get to the time of the rabbis. It's Israelite until we get to the time of the rabbis. As long as the temple is standing in Jerusalem, and even before that, as long as there's a sacrificial system to express worship to God, then we are Israelite. Without a sacrificial system and without the temple in Jerusalem, we're Jewish. Okay, so that's that. At that point in Jewish history, we transform from the Israelite people that is based in the temple in Jerusalem to a more portable religion in which prayer and halacha, the 613 commandments and all the other things that we do to define ourselves as Jews, take effect. Okay? So technically speaking, this is the start of the Israelite people, the Israelite family, that ends up being the first parents of what eventually will be the Jewish people. Okay, so let's start reading. I wanted to focus on the beginning of the portion, because here we're going to have Abraham and Sarah, and I want to talk to a little bit about them and their character. So, Vayomer Adonai El yes, Deborah, you have to unmute.
Is that also because we weren't Jews until Judah was born, after Judah was born?
Well, there's that too, but it's really, we're called Jewish because by the time of the Babylonian exile, the remnant of all of the Israelites are two tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Levi. Okay, so yes, we're called Jews because most of us are from the tribe of Judah. So you as a Levi, you're Jewish, but technically you're a Levite, right, from the tribe of Levi. But most of the 14 million Jews in the world today are from the tribe of Judah. So that's one reason. The other reason is because of why we're Jewish and not Israelite is just how the rabbis transformed who we are from a temple-based, sacrifice-based system to a more global system of halacha and prayer. And so that transformation from Israelite to Jew happened in the time of the rabbis. It's just so that the changing of the name just is an easier way to highlight that transformation. Okay, so Vayomer Adonai El Avram, Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit avicha El haaretz asher ar'eka. So Adonai, God says to Abram, right? So we have to remember, later in this week's portion, his name is changed to Abraham, and Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. So we just always refer to them as Abraham and Sarah. We just have to remember that originally they were Abram and Sarai. So God says to Abram, go. So, but it's more than go. Lech lecha, it could translate it as get up and go. It says here, go forth So again, so many times throughout the Torah, a verb is doubled in this way. So lech is the verb, go. It's the command form, go. Lech lecha is, so it seems like it's the same word being repeated. It's not exactly. Lecha is for you. That's what it means, for you or to you. So go for you. But what does that mean? So there's comments about that throughout the ages. It's like you're making this trip on your behalf, or it. I'm having trouble actually coming up with all the translations of it, because just to highlight that the go forth that is here in the English is by no means the exact translation. So it makes sense. But Lech Lecha, go for yourself. You're taking this trip that is going to be an identity defining trip. So I think that's all of that is understood in the Lech Lecha. Go for yourself. You're going to go now, and this trip that you're taking, this going that you're doing, is going to help define who you are. Okay, so in order to do this, you have to go from your country, from your birthplace, from the house of your father, to the land that I'm going to show you. Now, I just want to point out that we have to understand that when we're reading the portion this week, we already know the entire Torah because we've read through the entire Torah many, many times. So we have to understand the Torah as one big literary unit, so that these words here don't appear in a vacuum. So they remind us just go from your country, from your homeland, from the house of your father. You know, why does it have to say all three things? Just get up and go from where you are. Why does it have to say three things? But we have to remember, if we just hold our place here and look to chapter 22, that we have something there that is similar to this. In verse 2 of chapter 22 on page 118, we have this, Vayomer, God is saying to Abraham, Kachna et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak velech lecha el eretz hamoriah. All right, so this is from the portion that we're familiar with. God telling Abraham to take Isaac up to Mount Moriah. It's the portion we read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So here we have this triple form again, where God says, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Yitzchak. Okay, bincha yechidcha asher ahavta Yitzchak velech lecha. So another lech lecha. Okay, so it's a frame. Here, what we just read in chapter 12 is meant to be framed with chapter 22, verse 2. Okay, so Lech Lecha, go for yourself from your land, from your country, from your father's house, to the land that I'm going to show you. Okay, so just that literary style is framed, and that the journey he's taking here that begins his new the new phase of his life. Remember, he's 75 years old at this point, right? And he has another 70 years or so that he's going to be alive. So at 75, he's making this trip that he has to give up everything that he had until that point and go someplace new. You know, so the older we are, the harder it is to change. And so this is emphasizing everything that he's giving up. He's giving up his comfort zone, and he's putting his trust in God to go to a place that God's going to show him. He doesn't even know where he's going. So just get up and go to the place I'm going to show you. 2, so maybe this will be incentive to go. Ve'escha legoy gadol, va'avarechecha, va'agadla shemecha, v'heyei bracha. So I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Again, three things. So going from your land, from your home country, from your father's house, three ways of describing the place that he's that he's leaving. And now three things that God's going to do for him. God's going to make him a great nation. God's going to bless him. God's going to make his name great. And a fourth thing, you will be a blessing. Veheye bracha. You will be a blessing. So here is an interesting point. There's a quick comment below the line on number 2 there. Be a blessing. Hirsch, that is Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, takes this not as a promise but as a command. To merit the promised reward, you must live as to be a blessing to the world. Okay? So not that you will be a blessing, but you must be a blessing. In other words, you have to act like you are a blessing. All right, so that's an interesting point too. So that would make it different from the 3 other promises in the verse. So you got 3 promises of what God will do, because E'escha, I will make you. So the aleph there is I will. I will make you, I will bless you, I will make you great. Veheye, and now this is something that Abraham has to do. He has to be a blessing. Okay, so I think it's appropriate. Hirsch, it's not a stretch to say it that way, because the Hebrew itself from the verse is a different form. Okay, so in other words, it could be ve'eheyeh. No, that wouldn't be right. So and I will be a blessing. No, that would be God talking there. I will. Yeah. Well, see, God already says, "I will bless you," in the second line of verse 2. So veheye bracha. It is appropriate for Hirsch to point this out. God already says that God's going to bless Abraham. So here veheye bracha. It's not another promise. It is more appropriate to understand this as something that Abraham has to do. Okay, so God, he has to get up and go, and he has to act like he's a blessing. And for doing that, God's going to do these things for Abraham. Okay, and then verse 3, more things. Va'avaracha mevarchecha umekalelcha aor. I always stumble over these words. No matter how many times I've read them, I have to read them very slowly because the form of these words is just very unusual. V'nivrachu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. So I will bless those who bless you, God is saying, and I will curse those who curse you. And all people, all families of the earth will be blessed by you. Okay, so if you act, veheye bracha, if you act like a blessing, like lead your life as if you are recognizing that you are being blessed every single moment of the day, if you're acting like you are aware of God's existence and act accordingly, then if you do that, then I will be sure to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and make sure that everybody on earth will be blessed by your presence. Okay, so this is a great promise that God is giving to Abraham without telling us why. We're introduced to Noah in last week's portion, and we're told that he's a righteous man, but we weren't told in that portion what great things Noah did to deserve to be saved from among all people on earth. And we're not told here what are the great things that Abraham did to be deserving of this great reward. Why is God choosing Abraham among all other people? We're only told at the end of last week's portion that Abram was born and that Terach was his father, and he took Sarai as a wife. But we weren't told anything about him, to let alone to understand why God is choosing Abraham. So that's why the Midrash fills in the blanks with lots of stories about what happened in Abraham's youth, and that what led God to choose Abraham in this way. So there are references in our Siddur to things that Abraham did that are not in the Torah, but they're references to Midrash. And so, for example, it was just in the prayer for rain that we did a couple weeks ago on Shmini Atzeret, a reference to Abraham coming out of fire. So there's a story in the Midrash that about Abraham's monotheistic belief, as opposed to the pagan idolatry that was in the society around him. So King Nimrod, according to the Midrash, heard about Abraham professing his monotheistic beliefs to people, and Nimrod saw that as a challenge to the religion of the whatever society it was. He is in Ur Kasdim. So to test Abraham's faith, okay, Nimrod says to him, you believe in your God and that your God is so great, we're going to test your God and test your faith. I'll throw you into a furnace of fire. And God saves Abraham from the furnace of fire so that he comes out unscathed, unburned, alive. Okay? So that story of Abraham in the fiery furnace becomes part of folklore of our people, so much so that it makes it into the piyut, the religious poem that's part of the prayer for rain on Shmini Atzeret. So just like stories about George Washington and chopping down the cherry tree or throwing the silver dollar across the Potomac, that's all folklore about George Washington, but that's part of the civic lore of America. So, and so even greater, the religious lore of our people, we get stories that become so ingrained in our culture that we learn these stories in Hebrew school. Certainly we learn these stories in day school, and so it's understood like this is the history and these are the stories of the people, and then it's kind of shocking not to see the story in the Torah. We assume the story's in the Torah, but it's not there. So the fiery furnace story is not in the Torah, and also the story of Abraham's father Terach having an idol shop, and that Abraham one day, when Terach went out to lunch, put an axe in one hand of an idol, and Abraham himself smashed all the other idols, and that's found here below the line on page 69. This story that Terach comes back. What happened to all the idols? What did you do, Abraham? Abraham said, I didn't do it. This idol did it. And Terach says, no, this idol can't do it. It's just a statue. And Abraham says, exactly. Why are you bowing down to just a statue? So, okay. So the rabbis come up with these stories to explain Abraham's great belief and his innovation and coming up with monotheism, but it's not here in the Torah. All we're left in the Torah is that God chooses Abraham, and we don't know why. Okay, so I just want us to understand that not knowing why is integral to what's here in the Torah itself. The stories that are provided to fill in the gap are just those. They're stories. They're ancient stories. They're 2,000 years old. So yes, they're part of Jewish tradition, but they're not in the Torah. So we're still left in the Torah trying to figure out what was so great about Abraham to be chosen in this way and to be a source of blessing. Okay? And then verse 4. So another question comes up in the verses here. Vayelech Avram ka'asher diber elav Adonai, vayelech ito Lot, ve'Avram ben chamesh shanim v'shivim shana betzeto me Haran. Okay, so we have to remember that at the end of the last week's portion, Terach took his family from Ur Kasdim and went to Haran. Now, Haran is in somewhere in Syria today, around Damascus or even further out than that, but in what is Syria today. It's part of what's called the Fertile Crescent. So imagine an arc in green, because that's where the rivers are, and it's fertile farmland. Picture where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers come together in what is Iraq today, like around the city of Basra on the port of the Persian Gulf. So the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers come together like this, where my two palms meet. And so you create an arc from there going up into Syria and then down into Israel. So apparently, anthropologically, people traveled along that route throughout ancient times because there's rivers there, and there were cities there, towns and villages along the way. You can make a living along the way because you could have a farm. So that was the Fertile Crescent. So perhaps Ur Kasdim is where the rivers meet at the Persian Gulf. Perhaps Haran is the top of the arc, A-R-C, top of the arc. And then land of Israel is towards the bottom of the other side of the arc. Okay? So Abram goes. So he went according to what God told him to do. And with him went Lot. And Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Okay, so who's Lot? We know that he's his nephew because we're also introduced to him as well. Why is Lot going with him? Why isn't Lot's father going with him, Abram's brother? We don't know. That's another mystery. Perhaps the Midrash has an answer to this, but I'm not familiar with Midrashim about Lot and why he went and not his father, or why he went alone and not his father with him. Okay, so Haran, Lot's father was Haran. Let me just double check that. If we just look back. So Ela toldot Terach holid et Avram, et Nahor ve'et Haran, ve'Haran holid et Lot. Okay, so there are three sons that Terach has: Abram, Nahor, and Haran. All right, so Nahor and Haran stay back in Haran, and Lot goes with Abraham. So Sarah isn't even mentioned here yet. She'll be mentioned in verse 5. So just something else to keep in mind. Why did Lot go? Who's Lot? And what's his story? We don't know. We don't know. We'll see more about Lot later, and we'll learn more about who he is and what kind of family life he has. That will be in next week's portion. We learn a little bit more about him also in this portion. but not enough to tell us anything about who he is as a personality. Okay, verse 5. Vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto, ve'et Lot ben Achiv, ve'et kol rechusham asher rachashu, ve'et hanefesh asher asu becharan, vayetzu lalechet artza Canaan, vayavou artza Canaan. So Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, the son of his brother, so I'm saying nephew, and all their property that they acquired, and the people that they made. Interesting point. What does that mean? All the people that they made. Nefesh, right, what we understand nefesh in modern Hebrew as soul, in Torah Hebrew it doesn't mean soul, it means body. So we could, and all the bodies that they made in Haran. What does that mean? So according to the rabbis, it means they converted people to monotheism. Or it could be just the slaves that they acquired. That would be the simplest explanation. So all the property and all the slaves that they acquired. And they went to go to the land of Canaan. That's the first time this land is mentioned. God said, go to the land I'm going to show you. We don't know what land. And it's only here that it's the land of Canaan that is mentioned. And so they left to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. So what happened on the trip from Haran to Canaan? It's not an easy trip. It takes a while. We know from Jacob, in a few weeks we'll read about Jacob running away from home to go to Haran, to where his cousins are, and that seemed like it was an overnight trip, just the way the Torah described it. But it certainly took longer than that. I mean, it's probably a couple hundred kilometers. So what's maybe 75 miles? So if you figure you can do 20 miles a day, if you're walking. If you're on camelback, maybe you can do more than that a day. So maybe it's a 2-day trip, maybe. But you're working your animal hard to make it a 2-day trip. Anyway, it doesn't tell us anything about what happened on the way. They came to Canaan. Vaya'avor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem ad Elon Moreh veha-Kanaani az ba'aretz. So Abram traversed the land until the area of Shechem, until the terebinth of Moreh. So it's some official site, Elon Moreh, this place where this plant is. It says in a comment here, some extraordinary tree. So it was just known at that time that this tree was there. And the Canaanites were then in the land. That's what the Torah adds to us. So how long did it take him to walk around the land until he got to Shechem? We don't know. But that's just the important point. So he gets to Shechem. How long does he stay there? We don't know. Okay? So, but the very next thing, and this is what I want to talk about. So, Abraham did what God did, what God told him to do. So it sounds like he's going to be the blessing. And that he has to act like a blessing. Act like you believe in God. Act like you have faith in God. And so that happened. And so through verse 6, we see that it happened. How much time elapsed? We don't know. So then, verse 7, so it's seemingly the next moment. They settle in Shechem by the terebinth of Moreh. 7, Vayera Adonai el Avram, Vayomer Lazaracha etain et haaretz hazot, Vayiven sham mizbeach la'Adonai hanir'eh elav. Okay, so God appeared to Abraham and said to him, to your descendants I will give this land. And he built there an altar to God who appeared to him. Okay, and vayatek misham hahara mikedem leveit el vayet ohalo beit el miyam v'ha'ai mikedem vayiven sham mizbeach l'Adonai vayikra b'shem Adonai. And he moved on from there to the mountains, to the hill country. East, Beit El is on the east, to the east of Beit El, and he put up his tent there. Beit El was on the western side, and Ai, the city of Ai, was on the eastern side. So he's between Beit El and Ai, and he built there an altar to God, and he called out to the name of God, or he invoked God's name there. Vayisa Avram haloch venasoa hanegba. And then Abram also journeyed back and forth to the Negev. Okay, so Abram is like making the land his own, built an altar to God, believing in God, worshiping God. Time is elapsing, and he has faith in God. God appears to him. He trusts in God. And now this is what I really wanted to talk about, is verse 10. Vayehi ra'av ba'aretz. Vayered Avram Mitzrayim ala Gorsham, ki chaved hara'av ba'aretz. So then there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there, because the land was because the famine was severe in the land. Okay. Why does Abram leave Israel, the land of Canaan? So what if there's a famine in the land? Isn't God going to provide? Why does he have to go? And who said that he's allowed to go? God told him that he has to go to Canaan. Did God say that you can leave Canaan ever? So he just how is it that he understands that he's allowed to do this? So it's just interesting, right? So if we look below the line, Abram went down to Egypt. We're on page 72, below the line. He lowered himself to the moral level of that society. Even an Abraham is not immune to the influence of his surroundings. In a setting of danger and depravity, he can be vulnerable to fear and tempted to deceive others to save himself. This is what's going to happen in the story now. Clearly, to understand Abraham's motivation is not to justify it. The Torah continually portrays its leading figures with all of their flaws, perhaps to teach us that we too can be good people without being perfect people. Reading this and similar episodes, we can condemn Abraham's behavior while forgiving him, even as Sarah forgives him. Okay, so we're about to read a story, but even before we read the story, we should be asking, and we should be surprised that Abraham left Canaan. So what if there's a famine? So, first of all, why is there a famine? If God says to Abraham, I'm going to be a blessing to you, everybody who knows you is going to be blessed. If Abraham is supposed to be blessed, why is there a famine? Famine shows lack of blessing. Lack of food means lack of blessing. So why is verse 10 happening when verse 2 and 3 told us that Abraham would be a blessing? So we should be surprised by that. Okay? Then, why is Abraham choosing to leave? God told him to go to Canaan, or go to the land that I'll show you. He didn't say go there for a certain amount of time, or go there on condition that there'll be rain and you can sustain yourself, but if there's famine, you can leave. God didn't say any of that. So how is it that Abraham is allowed or allows himself to say, well, I got to leave. What does that say about Abraham? Okay, and then the leaving, let's see what happens in verse 11. Vayehi ka'asher hikriv lavo mitzrayma vayomer el Sarai ishto hinena yadati ki isha yafat mar'at. So when they got close to Egypt, like they're about to enter Egypt, he says to Sarai, his wife, I now know, or I've always known, I've always known that you are a beautiful woman. V'hayaki yiru otacha mitzrim, verse 12, v'amru ishto zot v'hargu oti v'otach yechayu. So now they'll, when the Egyptians see you, they'll say, she is his wife, and they'll kill me and keep you alive. Imrina achoti at, lama'an yitav li va'avrech, v'chayata nafshi biglalech. So please say that you're my sister, so that it'll be good for me because of you, and my body will stay alive because of you. So bizarre interaction. Bizarre interaction here, which I just want to spend a moment on here. Okay? Abraham, who we don't know. We have never heard Abraham speak before. There's been no description of Abraham speaking before. The narrator has not told us. These are the first words that we hear from Abraham that are attributed to Abraham. Abraham just does. He's born to Terach. He marries Sarai, and they as a family move from Ur Kasdim to Haran. That's all we know about him from the end of last week's portion. In today's portion, all of a sudden, he's 75 years old, and God's speaking to him, get up and go. And he gets up and goes. He doesn't say anything until right here. The first thing he says is a lie. Isn't that fascinating? The father of the Jewish people is a liar. The first thing he says. So what does that say about us as a people? What does that say about Abraham and Sarah? So even more so, the rabbis always in their midrash make Abraham and Sarah to be these ideal people, these people who are on a pedestal. And so when they see something like this, you can't avoid the words. The words say, tell the Egyptians that you're my sister. She's not his sister. So he's concerned about his life, and he doesn't care really. Like, what would happen? The Egyptians see that she's beautiful. They're going to take her. He doesn't care that the Egyptians, what the Egyptians might do to her, rape her, have their way with her. And so what kind of person is Abraham? And does the person who says this, is he worthy of what God said to him in verses 2 and 3? Get up and go, and I'll make you a blessing. So rightfully, we should be asking all these questions about that. And it's fascinating that the Torah puts it here and includes it here. If the Torah wanted us to see how great a person Abraham was, they might have told the story differently. But perhaps they're telling us that despite these flaws in which Abraham does anything in order to survive, even to have his wife lie. Okay, so the question is then, how do we overcome the faults in our personality? Okay, so Abraham, for the most part, what are the great things that Abraham does? Arguably, the greatest thing he does is argue for the survival of Sodom and Gomorrah. So in next week's portion, God tells Abraham he wants to destroy the cities. And Abraham bargains. What if there are 50 righteous people there? You can argue that's a great thing that Abraham does and serves as a model to us to advocate for people, to advocate for a cause, and to argue for that cause. And that serves as a model to us of how to be involved in social justice issues. We stand up because Abraham stood up. Okay, so that's a great thing that Abraham does. We could also argue that his faith, that he had strong faith in God by agreeing to bring Isaac up to the mountain as a potential sacrifice. That shows great faith and trust in God. Certainly, for modern sensibilities, that's extremely wrong, and we would never want to sacrifice children, and we would never assume that that's what God would want. But in the religious society that was the time of the Torah 3,000 or so years ago, that was an act of great religious courage. Okay, so those two things portray Abraham as a great person. But we don't know those things about Abraham yet. So the very first thing that he does, so yes, he gets up and goes. That's a great thing. We're led to believe that that's a great thing because he's listening to God, willing to leave everything he knows behind and to go to a new place. But the second thing we know is that he lies about, he tells his wife to lie. So it's just fascinating to me that the Torah, just by a straight reading of the text, certainly makes these people out to be normal people. These would be normal things that people would do. Okay, you're going to a dangerous place. Let's come up with a plan, even though we might be lying about it. Let's come up with a plan in order to survive. Yeah. So, any thoughts or comments about this? So that's what I wanted to talk about today, to think about Abraham, who he was, why he was chosen, and why the Torah is so cryptic about it, and how we can understand in any way his lie about his wife. All right. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. We pray for American democracy, and may it continue. And have a good rest of the week.
Bye. Thank you.